The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by guest chaplain Bishop Michael E. Dantley, Christ Emmanuel Christian Fellowship of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Let us pray. Our Father, as we are gathered in this sacred space, we are compelled to praise you for your goodness and mercy that follow us all the days of our lives. We are obligated to be reminded that it is you who have made us and not we ourselves. I pray that your purpose and design for our United States will have predominance in this space. As decisions are made through transparent debate, I pray that your wisdom and insight will prevail over human reasoning and personal preference. I pray that as deliberations take place in this chamber, that the well-being of every individual's life residing in the United States will be on the minds and hearts of every legislator. I pray that party lines will not diminish the desire to see policies established that are grounded in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all the United States citizens. I ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceeding and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Landsman, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor our guest chaplain, Bishop Michael E. Dantley of Christ Emmanuel Christian Fellowship in the neighborhood of Walnut Hills in the city of Cincinnati. Bishop Dantley has been the senior pastor of Christ Emmanuel for over 40 years, almost 50 years. He has worked to establish a grade school, built a program for the homeless, formerly incarcerated, and men battling addiction. He has been honored by numerous community groups, including the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, and uplifts his congregation with messages of hope and healing every week. As you heard today, he invokes action, to act for the good of our neighbors, especially the least of these. Bishop Dantley has been a guide and a source of strength for me, inspiring me to act even when I wasn't sure I could, to act in service of those I represent, especially those most marginalized. Thank you, Bishop Dantley, not just for joining me today, but for your decades of service to our community and our country. I yield back.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker.
Yeah. Mr. Thompson.
All right, Brennan. Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize National Teach Ag Day. National Teach Ag Day is for anyone who wants to celebrate school-based agricultural education, share the story of agricultural education's importance and effectiveness in the United States, and encourage students to consider careers as agricultural educators. This year, we are celebrating 75 years of National Association of Agricultural Educators. Madam Speaker, our agricultural educators are responsible for cultivating and inspiring the next generation of agricultural leaders. This happens in the classroom with extension programs or groups like FFA and 4-H. By recognizing our agriculture educators, we can ensure our students have knowledge and exposure to all the opportunities the agriculture industry and sector has to offer. Thank you to all the ag teachers and volunteers across the country who help support our nation's farmers, ranchers, foresters, and producers. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back to the balance of my time.
Thank you. And now, for what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle, seek recognition?
The other gentleman from Pennsylvania also seeks permission to speak for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise to honor Everett Beauregard, who 1 year ago tomorrow was senselessly taken from us in an act of gun violence in Philadelphia. I want to thank Everett's family and friends for joining us in the House Gallery this morning, and also thank them for the opportunity to stand with them last year to commemorate Everett's beautiful life. I'm here today because, like so many others, Everett impacted my life and the lives of my staff for the better. In 2018, Everett worked for me, helping my team in enthusiastically engaging with Philadelphia residents about the issues that were most important to them. His commitment to serving the public was evident from the outset. It was and is something for which I will always be grateful. As we mark this tragic anniversary, I want to reiterate the Beauregard family's ask that anyone with information regarding this senseless act of violence, please come forward. Your help can bring the person responsible for this heinous act to justice. Every piece of information, no matter how small, can help bring a sense of closure to Everett's family and many friends. You have the power to come forward and help. I implore you to do so. Thank you, God, for this wonderful human being you gave us. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Iowa seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Thank you. Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, I rise to shed a light on a critical issue that affects countless lives: suicide. National Suicide Prevention Month is not just a day of remembrance. It is a call to action. Mental health struggles are not a sign of weakness, and seeking help should not be stigmatized. We must come together to support individuals in crisis, especially our service members who have sacrificed so much for our nation. Let us remember that each life is precious and that there is always hope, even in the darkest of times. Reach out to your loved ones, check on your friends, and be the beacon of support that someone might desperately need. Together, we can speak out about mental health and degrade the barriers to treatment. This National Suicide Prevention Month, let us work hand in hand to ensure that everyone knows they are not alone and that help is always within reach. Together, we can make a difference and save lives. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Hispanic Heritage Month is about recognizing the countless contributions of Latinos across the nation. We celebrate the Latino entrepreneurs who have built thriving businesses, the doctors and nurses who provide essential health care, the teachers who inspire future generations, and the activists who tirelessly advocate for justice and equality. As we honor Hispanic Heritage Month, let us all commit to fostering an inclusive society where everyone, regardless of their background, can thrive and contribute to the American dream. Let's embrace the diversity that makes our nation stronger and more vibrant, and continue celebrating our heritage that enriches us all. Let's put diversity over hate, people over politics. Si se puede, que viva la gente!
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House and revise and extend my comments.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Today I recognize the legacy of service and leadership of Michael Pollock, a resident of Arizona's 5th Congressional District, and I join him in celebrating his 50th year as president of and founder of Pollock Investments, which specializes in commercial restoration, renovation projects, specifically long-term investments in shopping centers and other multi-tenant locations. In his industry, many developers will look at a property that has fallen into disrepair and see only a building ripe for destruction. But in his own words, Michael sees, quote, each real estate project as an opportunity to enhance the fabric of Arizona cities one development at a time. Whether refusing to take advantage of those affected by the housing crash or working with tenants to make it through the COVID era without closing their doors, Michael has always remained focused on protecting the overall economic and social health of our cities and their residents. Michael, your enduring legacy is one of inspiration, renewal, and compassion. You've set new standards in your industry and your community. You've made an immeasurable impact on the lives of countless Arizonans. On behalf of Arizona's 5th Congressional District, thank you for inspiring others by your unwavering commitment to making our communities better than you found them, one development at a time. I pay homage to you and congratulate you, Michael Pollock. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to rise and stand.
Thank you. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today, with my former colleagues in the North Carolina General Assembly, reaching an agreement to pass a new state budget comes the expansion of Medicaid. More than a decade after the Affordable Care Act became law, 95,000 Eastern North Carolinians trapped in the Medicaid coverage gap have been waiting, or in some cases, dying without access to life-saving health care. Since entering Congress, health care has been my top legislative priority, having led, co-led, or co-sponsored more than 50 bipartisan pieces of legislation. My very first acts in Congress included introducing a resolution to affirm support for Medicaid expansion and restarting the state Medicaid expansion caucus. To the people of Eastern North Carolina, know that I stand ready to fulfill my commitment to Medicaid expansion by working closely with officials to see this through and tackle the unacceptable health care disparities in our community. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Oh, Illinois. We changed up the order.
Speaker, from here or there?
You'd like to speak for 1 minute?
Yes, Ms. Speaker.
Yes. All right. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to stand in solidarity with our United Auto Workers brothers and sisters. Only 2 weeks before his assassination, Reverend Martin Luther King was in Memphis in support of the city sanitation workers' strike. To the crowd, he proclaimed that now is the time. I echo Reverend Martin Luther King's words from the People's Chambers and say unto UA Auto Workers, now is the time. Number one, now is the time for a cost of living adjustment. In real term, worker wages are down more than 10% less than they were in 2019, despite rising costs. Now is the time for an end to tiered employment in the automotive industry. Workers are making different wages doing equal work. This is simply unacceptable. The only difference between them is in which labor contract was enforced on the day that they started. Now is the time for job security, and as we transition away from combustion engines, these jobs need to stay in America and remain good-paying union jobs. Now is the time for a cost of living adjustment. Now is the time to end tiered employment pay. Now is the time for job security. I stand in solidarity with UAW. I yield back my time.
All right. Now, for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Speak for 1 minute on the floor and reserve the right to change my remark.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, I wish to recognize the extraordinary contributions of Cesar Millan. Cesar has transformed the lives of countless people and dogs and has also touched the hearts of people all over the world. From humble beginnings in Culiacán, Sinaloa, Mexico, working on his grandfather, Teodoro Millan Angulo's farm, Cesar came to the United States undocumented and unable to speak English, and he lives his dream right here in America, doing the job that he's always wanted to do, to be the best dog and human trainer in the world. Through his television series, The Dog Whisperer, Cesar taught us how to understand our four-legged friends and to better understand ourselves. He launched the Cesar Millan Foundation, a nonprofit organization designed to support the rescue, rehabilitation, and placement of abused and abandoned animals. Cesar Millan has inspired us to become more compassionate, more understanding, and more forgiving. As Cesar would say, better human, better dog, better together. Cesar is both a proud immigrant and a proud United States citizen. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
Senate 475, an act to designate the clinic of the Department of Veterans Affairs in Gallup, New Mexico as the Hiroshi Hershey Miyamura VA Clinic.
And the chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings or other audible conversation is a violation of the rules of the House. All right. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 712 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar number 37, House Resolution 712. Resolved, that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 4365, making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. Section 2A. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of this resolution, and pro forma amendments described in Section 4 of this resolution. B. Each amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment except as provided by Section 4 of this resolution, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. C. All points of order against amendments printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules or against amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of this resolution are waived. Section 3. It shall be in order at any time for the Chair of the Committee on Appropriations or her designee to offer amendments en bloc consisting of amendments printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc offered pursuant to this section shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees, shall not be subject to amendment except as provided by Section 4 of this resolution, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. Section 4. During consideration of the bill for amendment, the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees may offer up to 10 pro forma amendments at any point for the purpose of debate. Section 5. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 6. At any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1130 to repeal restrictions on the export and import of natural gas. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill, as amended, shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill, as amended, are waived. No further amendment to the bill, as amended, shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended, and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 7. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider in the House the resolution, House Resolution 684, condemning the actions of Governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, for subverting the Second Amendment to the Constitution and depriving the citizens of New Mexico of their right to bear arms. The resolution shall be considered as read. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the resolution and preamble to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts and ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During this resolution, all time yielded is for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on House Resolution 712.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, last night the Rules Committee met and reported out a rule, House Resolution 712, providing for consideration of H.R. 4365, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2024, under a structured rule. It provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. It also makes in order 184 amendments, more than 75% of those eligible for consideration. Finally, it provides for 1 hour or one motion to recommit. The rule also makes in order H.R. 1130, the Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act of 2023, under a structured rule. It provides for 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. It provides for one motion to recommit. Finally, the rule makes in order House Resolution 684 under a closed rule. It provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. I rise today, Madam Speaker, in support of the rule and the underlying legislation. Madam Speaker, as members are aware, the House has previously debated an identical rule covering H.R. 4365. This was a fulsome and passionate debate. and I said most of what was needed to be said from my point of view during that debate. But I'll make a few key points about this bill again now. The bill before us provides full funding for our national defense. It appropriates $826 billion in new discretionary spending, which is a modest increase of $300 million over the President's budget request of nearly $29 billion, or 3.6% over the FY 2023 enacted level. Madam Speaker, this truly is a good bill, one that I think the House can and should be proud of. It makes appropriate investments in the military and ensures that dollars are being directed where they are needed the most. It invests heavily in our service members, providing them with a 5.2% pay raise. It provides continued funding for new advanced weapon systems, ensuring that the military has the force it needs to confront any foe anywhere in the world at any time. And it continues to expand the Navy to protect the freedom of the seas and invest heavily in Asia and the Pacific theater, where China continues to expand its own military might in anticipation of a confrontation with the United States and our allies. Madam Speaker, providing funding for our national defense is both Congress's privilege and its responsibility. In order for our brave men and women in uniform to do their jobs, Congress must do its job. Today, we can take that first step toward doing so. The rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 1130, the Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act of 2023. This bill removes regulatory barriers for the construction and licensing of new liquid natural gas, or LNG, import and export terminals. Madam Speaker, when the Republican majority took over in January, we committed to unleashing America's energy potential. For too long, regulatory roadblocks and active hostility of the Biden administration have made it difficult to expand production of America's abundant energy resources. But despite the Biden administration's hostility, America is today the top producer of natural gas in the world. From my home state of Oklahoma, this is not an academic point. Oklahoma is the 5th largest natural gas producing state in the country, with nearly 350,000 jobs in the state tied directly to natural gas production. It is a critical part of my home state's economy. In recent years, innovation and new technology have revolutionized and expanded the production of natural gas, both in Oklahoma and in the United States as a whole. The people of my district are very proud to be part of that revolution. There's still more to be done, and the passage of H.R. 1130 will help make it easier, cheaper, and quicker to bring new LNG export terminals online. It's no exaggeration to say that American natural gas is a critical part of the world's energy mix, particularly in Europe, which previously sourced much of its natural gas from Russia. And we're capable of achieving more. The end result will be a strong future for us as we create more high-paying jobs and maintain America's energy independence, and a strong future for our friends and allies around the world who can source their energy needs from us rather than from vicious dictators like Vladimir Putin. All in all, this is a strong bill, one that I'm certainly proud to support. Finally, the rule makes an order, House Resolution 684, which condemns New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham for her executive order attempting to subvert Second Amendment rights of New Mexico citizens. As members are aware, earlier this month, Governor Grisham issued an executive order purporting to suspend the right of New Mexicans to open and concealed carry of firearms. Governor Grisham claimed that this was necessary in order to deal with a public health emergency. Of course, this claim is patently absurd. Now, there is not now, or there never has been, a public health emergency, an exception for constitutional rights. The right of Americans to bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment to the Constitution, and a constitutional right cannot be subverted at the whim of an elected official. Last week, a federal judge in New Mexico agreed and issued a restraining order blocking implementation of this patently unconstitutional order. Governor Grisham has rightly received condemnation on a bipartisan basis for her actions. House Resolution 684 will give all members of Congress an opportunity to do so officially and on the record. It's always appropriate for the House to take time to reaffirm our values as a country and to protect the constitutional rights that form the foundation of our republic. Indeed, I urge all members to do so and speak with one voice, reminding all Americans that when it comes to their constitutional rights, the House of Representatives has their back. Madam Speaker, I urge members to support both the rule and the underlying bills, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Is this Groundhog Day, Madam Speaker? Back again, once more, to debate a rule for bills that were considered and failed to make it to the floor. You can't make this stuff up. So what changed? Not the bill text, not the fact that we have less than a week before the government shuts down. Maybe the minds of a few of our colleagues across the aisle? I guess we'll see later today. But look, none of my remarks are directed to the gentleman from Oklahoma. I respect him personally and professionally. I think the world of him. I don't envy the task he has of trying to defend these bills or this process. But what the hell is going on in your conference? Because the truth is that under Speaker McCarthy's weak leadership, this Republican majority is a total failure, an unmitigated disaster. Those aren't even my words. That's what one of your own members said on TV a few nights ago about the process playing out in this chamber right now. First, we have this absurd, non-binding resolution condemning the governor of New Mexico for trying to keep her constituents safe from gun violence. Just to explain to folks who may be watching, this resolution does nothing, not a thing. It's a press release. Doesn't go to the Senate, doesn't go to the president. It does nothing. So we are doing that, and we are doing nothing right now to avert a government shutdown. I mean, this place is becoming, a chamber where we debate trivial issues passionately and important ones not at all. And then we have a ridiculous bill about liquefied natural gas. The House has already passed this bill not once, but twice. But of course, it makes sense to waste more time passing it again when a shutdown's looming and Republicans have no plan to keep the government running, right? This rule would also bring to the floor the Republicans' Department of Defense appropriations bill. Yes, this bill has horrible, harmful policy riders that strip people's rights and push MAGA culture wars. It also reaffirms the Pentagon's bloated budget at a time when the far-right wingnuts are holding up all other appropriation bills because they feel they don't cut enough money from programs that help everyday Americans. And we still don't have a plan to fund the government. I know if some of my Republican colleagues had their way, we'd pass their continuing resolution that contains mindless, across-the-board spending cuts. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to cut funding for cancer research, for Head Start programs, for air traffic safety, for border security, and a 65% cut to heating assistance for families just as it's starting to get cold. Talk about cruel. Now, these cuts aren't just cuts, they cost us. Do people realize what Head Start does? It invests in kids from low-income families so they can have more opportunity in life. The return on investment is almost $10 for every $1 spent. Cancer research. Do Republicans realize that investing in cancer research now saves us healthcare costs, not just now, but down the road, and it saves lives? Their appropriation agenda cuts all this and more. But you know where Republicans refuse to cut from? This bill, the Pentagon, the biggest, most expensive bureaucracy in our federal government, the Department of Defense. So for whatever reason, it's okay to cut programs like WIC that help feed pregnant moms, but they can't find a single weapon system where there's any waste? I mean, and I'm happy to provide numerous articles and reports from my colleagues about the cost overruns in so many of these wasteful missile systems. The defense spending bill, which is the most extravagant defense spending bill ever, failed a rule vote on Tuesday because the Republican conference is in absolute chaos. Best I can tell, no one on the other side of the aisle has any objection to the top line number in the Pentagon bill, but yet they voted down the rule just the other day. I know that whipping votes can be difficult, but the number of backroom secret deals and late night seances Republicans have had to hold this year to revive bills from the dead is astounding. And I'm afraid things will only get worse as we near September 30th. Republicans are acting like the end of the fiscal year just snuck up on them. Newsflash, the deadline to fund the government isn't some big secret. They've had months to prevent a government shutdown. But the reality is that not once have Republicans given us a bill that can keep the government open. Republicans barely control 1/2 of one branch of government. And yet, they act like they're king of the hill, like it's their way or the highway, that nothing else matters. The only way this slim House Republican majority can keep the lights on is if they get Senate Democrats and the president to agree. But they haven't even begun to reach across the aisle to negotiate because they're busy negotiating amongst themselves. Hell, at this rate, they might not even be able to get Senate Republicans to agree, given how extreme their conference has become. Madam Speaker, this majority is a failure. The clowns are running the circus. The day Speaker McCarthy handed his gavel over to the clown show, this was the inevitable outcome. But there is a different path that we can choose right here and right now. Work with Democrats to prevent a shutdown. Work with us to keep the government open. Work with us to honor the deal you made earlier this year. It is time for the ringmaster of this circus, Kevin McCarthy, to stand up to the clowns and say, enough with the extremism and the blackmail. Stop wasting time and work with us to get this done in a bipartisan way. And with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. I want to return again my friend's compliments. I enjoy working with him on the Rules Committee. We've been there together a long time, and there's nobody that I have a higher professional and personal regard for than my good friend. And honestly, Madam Speaker, I wish I had his talent for colorful rhetoric. I particularly like the Groundhog Day. I do remind my friend, while there is some similarities, the movie had a happy ending. Everybody learned some lessons, and they got to where they needed to be, and I think we may be involved in a process some like that. I do disagree with my friend that the issues that are being brought up in this bill are trivial. Defending the United States of America is not a trivial thing. You can agree or disagree with the bill, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and that's fair enough. I don't consider that trivial. Providing natural gas in abundance and at modest prices to Americans and having that resource to deal with our adversaries overseas who often use energy as a weapon, and to be able to provide for our friends and allies reliable energy is not a trivial matter. It's extraordinarily important matter. And the 10 million Americans that work in the domestic energy industry think what we're doing here is the right thing to do. So I don't consider their interests and their views trivial. I'm just very privileged to represent many people that have that point of view or involved in that particular profession. And finally, I don't consider standing up for the Second Amendment a trivial thing. We have a governor that issues an order that immediately a federal judge overturns, and Democrats in New Mexico condemned. Elected Democrats, law enforcement officials, quite a bit of bipartisan. It's actually one of the areas, and what's usually a contentious issue, that we had really strong bipartisan agreement. So we think it's important to make that point. If my friends have a different point of view, that's fair enough. Then just express it and we'll move on. But again, we don't consider defense of the Constitution to be trivial. I will agree with my friend about a number of things, and we've had this discussion, frankly, as as friends in the committee. I agree with him about shutdowns. I do not think it's an appropriate tactic, and I hope that we're able to avoid one. And there will be an appropriate time, I'm sure, when we discuss with our friends how and to do that. But we need a negotiating position. We're working toward that, and we hope we'll get there. Believe me, I am well aware that we have a Democratic Senate. This House has done wonderful work on things like H.R. 1 to deal with energy, H.R. 2 to deal with our border. We send them over there, and they're never picked up, never heard of again, unless we can snatch pieces out of them here or there and attach them to one of these broader agreements, as we were able to do in the debt ceiling crisis over permitting of facilities, both for renewable and non-renewable energy. So, again, it's a difficult legislative process, and I agree that it's going to be complicated, but our goal is to get to the same place. That is to make sure that the government is funded, but also that we advance shared values that we have, and we have an open and honest discussion with the United States Senate. When we do that, we've been able to find some agreement. My friend likes to point out, and all my Democratic friends like to point out regularly, well, gosh, why are you passing appropriations bills at less than the letter agreed on? Well, gee whiz, where I come from, if you can do something for less money, that's usually a good thing to do. And I'm never going to apologize. We see a different way to get to a policy objective that costs less money. That's a good thing to do. Now, I know, and we discussed this last night, the Senate is consistently appropriating above the agreed upon number. All the appropriations bills, or pretty much all of them they've dealt with so far, are at higher levels. So guess what? We'll get into negotiation. My guess is they'll come down some, we'll come up some, we'll find some sort of common deal. That's just the way politics work. But I'm never going to be critical of my colleagues for trying to do something cheaper and save money. I do remind my friend of the condition which the Democratic majority left our fiscal finances. We're running a $1.7 trillion deficit this year. 1.7. That's bigger than all the discretionary budget of the United States of America. We have not had a Democratic president submit a budget that comes into balance, not in a decade, but ever, since Bill Clinton. President Obama never did. President Biden never has. I don't think any future Democrat will. We used to have Democrats in the 1990s that we disagreed with, that we fought, but they said, well, let's try to get to a balanced budget within 10 years. They managed to do it. My friends have basically abdicated that debate. They just let it go on and on out to infinity. Even President Trump submitted budgets that within a decade came into balance. Now, I didn't always agree with them. Some of the decisions, I don't think either party's done a very good job, and we've had this discussion in dealing with the real drivers of debt, and that's mandatory spending, that's Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. We need to have that debate. I hope the presidential contest has it, and I note at least some of the discussions we've been having in our caucus talk about having a debt commission attached to some of this, so perhaps we can make some modest steps. My friends heard me talk about my Social Security bill, which is really modeled after what was done in '83 by Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill, and Howard Baker working together, a commission, and then Congress voting, including, by the way, the President of the United States at that time, who liked commissions, voting for the commission, for the deal, and it worked. It improved the physical solvency of the country, and it extended the life of Social Security, a program I know that we both support. So, again, you may think these are trivial issues. We don't. We think we have a long process in front of us. These are steps in the right direction on the appropriate end. There won't be enough. Last point I will make, too, and my friend and I just disagree here. Look, defense is a very different thing than any other part of the appropriations process. Most of the appropriation process is about things that are desirable and good. I've worked pretty hard on cancer research, so my friend's points are well made there. I think those are valuable investments. Defense is about threats. We had a peace dividend in the 1990s. You know why we had it? Because the Soviet Union had collapsed, and we could prudently save money in defense. I would tell you right now, I would go higher than the number here. But if the number we have on defense is outrageous, your first call ought to be to the White House, because it's basically the president's number. We actually pulled back from where our defense appropriators wanted to go, and a lot of our defense hawks wanted to go, because we did think addressing budget the horrific deficits that were inherited from the last Democratic era meant even here we had to make sacrifices. But I'm not really comfortable with it, but it's a step in the right direction. And we might not even have to have that if you hadn't, through reckless spending, unleashed the worst inflation in 40 years. I actually have a 40-year-old son. He'd never seen anything like what happened in the Biden administration because of the passing irresponsibly of $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, another $700 billion much misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. So, we inherited a mess. We inherited your inflation. We inherited record deficits. Pretty tough deal. And my friends don't want to address them. Well, this majority is going to do its best to address those issues. And we do struggle and disagree. And sometimes I get frustrated with some of my friends on my side of the aisle about tactics they presume. You're right about one thing, and I will agree with you 100%. There is no objection to this rule on the basis of the rule. There's nothing wrong with it. 184 amendments. You can agree or disagree with the bill, but it's a good rule. There's, in my view, nothing wrong with the bill other than I would like to have spent a little bit more money, or like any bill that spends this amount of money, everybody could do it a little bit differently. People are trying to make other points unrelated to the bill. I will agree with my friend. That's unfortunate. I don't think that's a good way to legislate. I think you should look at the legislation in front of you. If you agree with the rule, you ought to vote for it. You should, if you disagree, fair enough to vote against it. But if you agree with the basic bill, you don't relate it to something else and try and use it as a weapon. And we don't have many members that do that. We have a few. And as my friend knows, we have a very narrow majority. You've been here once or twice yourself when you had narrow majorities. So it's part of the legislative process. We'll continue to work it. But my hope today is we'll advance this rule. It will open the way to advance what I think is a good defense appropriations bill. And we'll continue to move legislatively as rapidly as we can. And we'll work, and at the appropriate time, I'm sure, work across the rotunda with Democrats in the Senate and probably in this chamber with some of my Democratic friends, and hopefully we'll avoid a government shutdown. The most important thing, though, today, move the rule, move the bill. That's what we are going to try and do. So with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And before I yield to our next speaker, I just want to clarify for the record, because I don't want to be misunderstood or mischaracterized, because I have great respect for the gentleman. I never said the defense appropriations bill was trivial. I said the defense appropriation bill was bloated and filled with the kitchen sink of MAGA culture wars. And on the second bill, the LNG bill, I said it was repetitive, because we've passed it twice already. It's going nowhere. We're going to pass it a third time, and that's going nowhere. At a time when our government's about to shut down, I mean, to take up a bill that is repetitive, that's going nowhere, seems like not a good use of our time. I did say that the non-binding resolution on guns was trivial because it doesn't do a damn thing. And we're living in a country where we have massacres occur on a regular basis, and we can't get any legislation to the floor, and the only bill we get to the floor on guns is a non-binding resolution that does nothing, that doesn't even go anywhere. It can't go to the Senate, doesn't go to the President. So I just want to be clear on what I said, because I think it is important. I do believe that this bill, this non-binding resolution, is an example of how trivial issues get debated passionately here and important ones not at all. I'm now happy to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Boyle.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my good friend from that other Commonwealth, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're 9 days away, 9 days and maybe call it 14 hours from a government shutdown. Completely unnecessary. In this chamber, just 3 months ago, we had a vote. We voted to raise the debt ceiling, and we also voted to set the parameters and the figures for what next year's budget would be. That vote was overwhelmingly bipartisan. 80% of House Democrats and almost 2/3 of House Republicans voted for it. A similarly large bipartisan vote in the Senate, and then signed into law by the President. I thought at that point, well, this is good news. Not only are we ensuring that we didn't go over the cliff in terms of the debt ceiling, it looks like we won't have another Republican-forced government shutdown. And yet here we are. Why? Because the Speaker of the House reneged on that deal, even though 2/3 of their side of the aisle joined 80% of us in voting for it. Honor the agreement we had and that you voted for. This is completely unnecessary. Yesterday in the Budget Committee, we marked up a completely partisan, one-sided budget resolution, an all-day markup, $16 trillion worth of cuts, completely unrealistic, as Congressional Budget Office itself labeled a cuts-only approach. But during that hearing, I pointed out that in previous government shutdowns, the Republican government shutdown in 2013 cost the economy upwards of $6 billion. More than 120,000 fewer jobs as a result of that government shutdown. A subsequent Republican-forced government shutdown also cost the economy billions of dollars and also cost us jobs. So while it might be a game for some in Washington, D.C., there are quotes from a number of members on the other side of the aisle, by the way, saying they want a government shutdown. So don't take my word for it. Just read the quotes of some of the Republican members of the House cheering a government shutdown, saying that there would be no problem at all. If only that were so. It costs us billions of dollars. Nothing good comes out of it. Actually, I take that back. There is one thing that's good that comes out of it. Each and every time over the last 30 years that Republicans have forced a government shutdown, in the subsequent election, they are punished by the voters. That was the case back in 1995. It was the beginning of Bill Clinton's comeback. He was losing in the polls at that moment to Bob Dole. Then the government shut down, the Gingrich-Dole shutdown. Bill Clinton came back, went on to win re-election by over 8 points. Similarly, in 2011, Barack Obama, at that moment in 2011, the poll showed losing to Mitt Romney. Republican extremism forced the shutdown. Their extremism in playing around with the debt ceiling led to the first ever downgrade in American history. Barack Obama ends up coming back, beats Mitt Romney a year later by 4 points. So maybe there is one good thing that comes out of Republican extremism. If there's anything that's clear over the last 9 months, this side doesn't have a clue about governing. And I keep hearing about the small majority. We know what it's like to have a small majority. We had the exact same 5-seat majority last term. What did we do with it? Passed the most ambitious domestic policy legislation since 1965. What has this side done? Takes them 15 votes just to elect their own guy speaker. And now they keep haranguing the poor guy, keep threatening him with the job day after day. Now he's reneging on his own agreement that he signed into law, or that he brought here and voted for and that we passed in June. And by the way, we all know the way this is going to end, whether it's before a shutdown or afterwards. The only thing that can pass the Senate, pass the House, and be signed into law by the President looks a lot like that legislation that passed here in June. So I hope that it doesn't take a government shutdown for the other side to finally get with it and to learn these lessons. The reality is ordinary Americans will suffer as a result of a government shutdown. It is completely unnecessary, and if it happens, it is solely the blame of the House Republican leadership. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I want to respond to some of my good friend from Pennsylvania's points, and some of them I agree with. I do think shutting down the government is not an appropriate tactic, so we agree on that. Linking them to election results is really an interesting exercise. The government shutdown that I think my friend thought was in 2011, if I'm correct, and I may be wrong, was really the one in 2013. We actually picked up seats in 2014. I don't think that's why we picked up seats. And my friends always forget that they shut down the government in 2017 and they won seats in 2018. So you can pretty much play these numbers however you want. The important point, which my friend makes and I agree with, shutting down the government is bad for the American people. It's an abdication of our responsibility. It's something we should not do. I've never supported them in the past. I hope we manage to avoid one now. I think that's exactly in what the Speaker is engaged in trying to accomplish, whether my friends agree with his methods or not. I will tell you, I am mystified by this concern about the agreement, quote unquote. Again, we agreed on the top line numbers. We didn't say we're going to the top line numbers. This is the top line number. If we can do it for less and persuade the Senate that that's a good idea, then I don't see that as a bad thing. But if my friends are concerned about keeping agreements, maybe they ought to call over to their friends in the United States Senate who are producing bill after bill that are above these numbers. Guess what? I suspect each side is positioning for a negotiation, and magically we probably won't be too far off if we come to an agreement of the numbers that are laid out in the debt ceiling deal. So I'm not telling you this is the most efficient way to legislate, but I've seen it before, and we're seeing it from both sides right now. In terms of the budget, I tell you what, I'm interested in the opinions my friends have on the budget because they didn't bother to do one for the 4 years they were in the majority. So I'm thrilled they're actually marking up a budget in the Budget Committee. And I give Chairman Arrington a lot of credit for doing it. It's hard to do. My friends didn't do it for 4 years because they couldn't do it, because they couldn't come to an agreement. As a matter of fact, I remember those 4 years. I used to serve on the Budget Committee. You couldn't get a budget committee or budget out of the Budget Committee that you controlled. So you want to talk about dysfunction? And that Budget Committee sets the top line number for all spending. Maybe that's why we overspent so much. Matter of fact, you deemed budgets in the rule. So I would agree with you. We should probably be sitting down and figuring out ways to run our fiscal affairs better, and particularly to do it in a more cooperative way because, as my friends point out, you do control the United States Senate, you do control the United States presidency. But please don't lecture me on how you do budgets when you had the House, the Senate, and the presidency and could not write a budget in 4 years and get it out of your own committee, let alone bring it to this floor. And some of those years, you weren't operating with a 5-seat majority. You just couldn't get the job done. So we're trying. I commend the Budget Committee. I hope they bring one out here. I'll be disappointed if they don't, but at least they're making the effort. Finally, again, to my friends, I can't figure out whether you want the Speaker to succeed or not, because there's lots of expression. Oh, I feel sorry for him in the job he has. Don't worry, he likes the job he has. He works hard at it every day. I think he's a good Speaker. He delivered on a debt ceiling deal that my friends even in the end came around and voted for, and he delivered one that was a heck of a lot better because it had some genuine concessions in it in terms of energy production, in terms of setting top lines. So we're on the eve of another kind of negotiation, and maybe we can find common ground again. I genuinely, quite frankly, hope that we do. And in that process, there'll be plenty of people on both sides of the aisle that don't like what the end product is, and they'll vote accordingly, and that's fair enough. But this is just kind of the way it works around here right now, and I think the Speaker's doing a terrific job trying to work the process, trying to make sure legislation moves across the floor in regular order, and trying to, get to numbers that begin to bring down this horrific deficit that my friends left the country with no plan to deal with it. No plan. Nobody in the White House has a plan. The President has never submitted a budget that comes into balance. He won't talk about entitlement reform, rules it out. I'm sorry, if you're serious about the budget deficit, you do control 2/3 of this process. And I know it's inconvenient when we bring up the fact that we're spending a lot more money and you have no plan to deal with it, but that's what we're going to do. And we'll see. The American people can make a choice in the next election about that. But I'm not going to be critical of my friends, even when I'm critical of their tactics, and I am sometimes, not critical of people that are trying to lower the budget deficit and trying to restore a measure of fiscal sanity to this country. That's something that Democrats used to care about, did care about when I first got here, totally abandoned it during the Obama presidency, totally gone. So when my friends want to get serious, they'll have a willing negotiating partner on the budget. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, the concern we have over here on this side of the aisle is that there are members on the Republican side who seem to be cheering on a shutdown. The other day, in an interview with PBS NewsHour, a fellow colleague on the Rules Committee, Mr. Norman of South Carolina, was asked how likely a shutdown is. And his response was, it's 100%. And then, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a Truth Social post from yesterday by Donald Trump opposing the GOP's continuing resolution. I mean, the twice impeached, 4 times indicted former president is weighing in on the funding fights within his party, and ultimately he is endorsing actions that will shut down the government. And I have a strange feeling my Republican counterparts will gladly comply at the expense of the American people because everybody on that side of the aisle is so frightened of him. The gentleman from Oklahoma was talking about a shutdown in 2018. I don't disagree with my friend that there was a brief shutdown in early 2018, one that a lot of people don't remember because it was so short. But of course, Republicans were I should point out that Republicans were in charge of the House and in charge of the Senate at the time. But I know some Democrats were pushing to help Dreamers as part of a funding deal. But that brief symbolic shutdown lasted less than 72 hours, most of it over the weekend, and if I remember correctly, it had no lasting impact. Now compare that to the 5-week Republican shutdown in 2018, which reduced economic output by $11 billion in the following 2 quarters, including $3 billion that the United States economy never regained. And that was a partial shutdown. And then the 2013 full Republican shutdown reduced GDP growth by $20 billion, according to Moody's Analytics. $20 billion. So I think it's a little more than unfair to play the both sides card here because it doesn't apply. Mr. Speaker, Republicans claim that they're trying to save money, but continually weaken the United States government's creditworthiness at a cost to the United States taxpayers. In August, Fitch cited a decline in governance as a key reason for the United States downgrade due to repeated battles over the past 2 decades that have led to government shutdowns or even taken the government to the brink of a debt default. Republicans need to get serious about governing and protect the United States creditworthiness. And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from the AP entitled, "The U.S. Government's Credit Has Been Downgraded."
Without objection.
There are consequences to these games that people on the right are playing. And the consequences are detrimental to our economy, which in turn are detrimental to the American people. The gentleman from Oklahoma also talked about the Senate. Boy, I wish we were behaving more like the Senate than behaving like we are here in the House. In the Senate, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Murray, is actually working with the Republicans, Senator Collins. They issued a statement from the Senator Murray saying, Vice Chair Collins and I have discussed how best to address these concerns, and we have agreed to make use of additional emergency appropriations, just as we do every year, and is fully allowed under the debt ceiling deal to address in a bipartisan way some of the pressing challenges our nation faces. In order to take these concerns regarding our defense and non-defense needs seriously and to ensure we deliver the strongest possible bills with the broadest bipartisan support possible, Vice Chair Collins, again, she's a Republican, and I agreed to add $13.7 billion in additional emergency appropriations, including $8 billion for defense and $5.7 billion for non-defense, spread across 4 subcommittees, including the State Foreign Ops bill that we're considering today. This is in response to that. The bottom line is what they're doing in the Senate is what we should be doing here. Even though the Democrats control the Senate, they're sitting down with Republicans and they are having conversations. They are trying to come to deals. They are trying to not only get a short-term bill done to keep our government from shutting down, they're trying to figure out the long-term way forward. The Senate has used the Fiscal Responsibility Act as a starting point for meaningful bipartisan dialogue and compromise. They reached an agreement to stay within the 1% of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and collaborated to report out 12 bills with near bipartisan unanimity. Meanwhile, House Republicans haven't taken a single meaningful step to engage Democrats on necessary compromise. They failed to garner a single Democratic vote for their bills in committee and haven't been able to bring 2 of their bills to the full committee for consideration because the cuts were too deep. Even moderates on your side don't want to vote on those things. And this is about the Senate following a bipartisan collaborative process versus House Republicans turning their backs on that process and negotiating amongst themselves to make their bills more partisan. I mean, there's a way to do this, but unfortunately, you have a small group of the most extreme of the extreme calling all the shots. They're moving this place in the wrong direction. These are the people cheering for a government shutdown. These are the people who don't care how much they hurt the American people with across-the-board mindless cuts in programs like Head Start and WIC, and in medical research. And LIHEAP, cutting it by 65%. I come from a state up north, Massachusetts. Tell my constituents who depend on LIHEAP to heat their homes the thinking behind gutting LIHEAP by 65%. Talk about cruel. There are consequences to your actions. There are consequences to your words. The downgrading of our credit, and if you succeed in getting some of these cuts, people are going to lose benefits that they not only rely on to do things like heat their homes, they need them to survive. So enough of the nonsense. Let's come together and let's stop wasting time, bringing another extreme CR to the House Rules Committee to bring on this floor that makes the crummy bill you brought the other night look like, it's reasonable. I mean, come on. We're running out of time. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Members are again reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, Mr. Alford of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to get one thing straight for our members on the other side of the aisle. The only shutdown that we are in favor of is a shutdown of the woke indoctrination in our military, the shutdown of the infection of socialism propagated by the other side, and a shutdown of the bloated government spending and the overreach of regulation in America. Now on to my main point. I rise today to condemn in the strongest terms possible, Mr. Speaker, the blatant attacks on the Second Amendment from the governor of New Mexico. We saw with COVID unprecedented government overreach that infringed on the rights of millions of Americans. Let me be crystal clear, Mr. Speaker. There is no such thing as a state public health emergency exception in the U.S. Constitution. No such thing. The Second Amendment is a God-given right to the American people. We will not sit idly by as the people of New Mexico have their rights trampled by an unhinged lunatic. Throughout history, countless populations have been rendered vulnerable due to their inability to defend themselves from both external and internal threats. Our founding fathers, with great foresight and understanding of history's lessons, enshrined the right to bear arms not only as a protection from foreign invaders, but also as a safeguard against potential domestic tyranny. I urge my colleagues to support House Resolution 684 and push back against the attacks on we, the people's God-given rights. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from Missouri yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, like I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to engage in the frivolous part of what this rule provides. I think Mr. Cole and I were having a serious debate about I think things that really matter here in terms of our economy and about whether or not we can fund our government. And I'm not going to waste time talking about a non-binding resolution that is nothing more than a press release. But I should ask the gentleman. I don't know how many more speakers he has.
I'm prepared to close whenever my friend is.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let's be honest with each other. We are only a few days away from a shutdown. And we are in chaos because the Republican Party is in the middle of a civil war. That's just a fact. Speaker McCarthy cut a deal on spending levels back in May. That is what the Senate has acted on in a bipartisan way. The only people not holding up the bargain are House Republicans. Speaker McCarthy is breaking his word. And I get it. I get it. I mean, he handed over the gavel to the most extreme in his party. He put the patients in charge of the hospital, and now he is getting blackmailed. Good luck to him getting out of the mess that he's made. But the American people deserve better. And they deserve to know that there is a difference here, a very clear difference. We may not always agree on every single issue, but Democrats come to this place every single day, and we worry. We worry about people, making sure that people get better jobs. We worry because we want people to have better health care. We want people to have higher wages. We worry because we want to make sure that people have clean air and water and great schools where we know our kids will make it home from school that day and they'll be safe. And we want to make sure that everybody has access to affordable housing. And Republicans worry too. But it seems that this Republican majority worries mostly about their own power. They worry about fighting with each other, trying to shut down the government, impeach the president, and remove their own speaker. The Republican majority in this House is a joke. They wasted weeks talking about gas stoves, weeks arguing about book bans, weeks telling kids what soccer team they can play on, and now we're on the eve of a shutdown, and they're doing nothing to stop it. In fact, they're moving in the wrong direction. We have members on the other side of the aisle who go on network news and say, shut it down, telling people that it's 100% certain that there'll be a government shutdown. Who cares, they say. Really? Earlier, I talked about a seance after looking at what's happening on the other side of the aisle. I think what this place needs is an exorcism. The Republican Party has gone to war with itself. And it doesn't matter which side wins, because either way, they're not worried about anybody but themselves. This is a serious, consequential moment for this Congress. There are real impacts if there is a government shutdown. There are impacts to our credit rating. There are impacts to job creation. There are impacts to a whole bunch of things, but most importantly, Mr. Speaker, there are impacts, negative impacts for the people of this country. We've seen this movie before. It doesn't have a good ending. It doesn't have a good ending. But in these last few days that we have, rather than fighting amongst yourselves, why don't you try something radical? And that is sitting down in a bipartisan way and coming to a deal that will get a majority of votes in this House. It requires the Speaker of the House to stand up to the extremists. It requires him to demonstrate some leadership. That's what's needed. You know, I mean, to become Speaker of the House and not lead, and to not believe that it is an obligation of everybody in this chamber to, at a minimum, keep the lights on. I mean, this is the moment where we need some leadership, where he needs to stand up and tell the extremists no. I mean, I said before, it's like, you know, the clowns are running the circus, and there's no ringmaster. I mean, enough of this. This is a bad movie. And by the way, you know, it's not just Democrats who are expressing concern about what's going on. And it's not just independents as well that are expressing concern, but I hear it from members of your own conference who have been on, you know, TV basically sounding the alarm bells saying, this is dysfunction. This is an unmitigated disaster. These are the words of Republican members who are warning your leadership to get their act together. And again, I mean, you know, we'll see how things work out this weekend. But if the reports that we're reading are true, you know, we're going to see a CR come to the Rules Committee that's even more extreme than the extreme CR that we dealt with and that was pulled the other day. I mean, at the end of the day, I think people need to know that when you cut some of these programs, when you cut LIHEAP, that means there are people who will not be able to heat their homes in the wintertime. When you cut Head Start, that means there are countless kids who will not have an opportunity to succeed in the future. When you cut programs like WIC, it means that there are pregnant mothers and newborn babies that will not have access to good nutrition. When you cut medical research, you are not only putting farther off the day where we find a cure to some of these dreaded diseases that kill people, and you are also making it certain that the costs of health care will continue to rise. So none of this makes any sense. And I know that there are adults on the other side of the aisle that want to do the right thing. So I plead with my colleagues. I mean, we'll go through this, whatever we're going to do, a bill that is non-binding, that means nothing, an LNG bill that we've done twice before that's going nowhere fast, and then we'll do this defense appropriations bills, again, that represents the kitchen sink of MAGA culture wars. We'll go through all of that. But while we're doing that, I hope that people are sitting down and getting serious to avoid a government shutdown. And then let's get together and do what the American people elected us to do. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge a strong no vote on this rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time. And in closing, I want to urge all of my colleagues to support the resolution. The rule will make and order 3 bills. First, it makes an order Department of Defense Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2024. It'll provide full and complete funding for our armed forces and defense needs and provides the resources necessary to defend freedom around the world. It makes an order H.R. 1130, unlocking our domestic LNG Potential Act. We think that's important. My friend had a interesting discussion about LIHEAP. I actually share my friend's view. It's an important program. I remember when I chaired the subcommittee on the appropriations that I had to actually reverse a cut ordered by President Obama of $300 million in his own budget, and we stopped that from happening. So, you know, people throw out numbers and then you work it through. That's just, I always call a presidential budget a bargaining position. I think the same thing tends to be true of congressional budgets, but we'll work that through. The real cause of lack of heating, though, let's be real about this, is not LIHEAP and whether it's funded or not. It's whether or not there's natural gas to heat it in the first place. And my friends have done everything possible to increase the cost and limit the availability of the very product that they want to provide with a government program. Hey, it would be better for every single American if you would just simply be pro-energy production in our country. It's okay to be for renewables. I'm for renewables. My state's like number 1 or 2 in the country in wind power, well ahead of a lot of other progressive states. We just think what works is what you ought to do. We got a lot of wind in Oklahoma. It makes a lot of sense, so we use it. And if it lowers emissions, we think that's good. Natural gas, by the way, has been the single biggest driver of lowering emissions. My friends have done nothing but make it harder in that industry. And frankly, and I mean this with all due respect, I hear people in that industry and companies in that industry vilified routinely. If I said those things about people in your respective states engaged in energy or in other kinds of production, you'd be appalled because you know those people. I got millions of people in the energy industry. I have thousands of people in my district that go out and work on rigs, they go out and lay pipeline, they go out and find oil and gas. Hard work. And they do that, and they give a lot of parts of the country that don't have energy production the cheapest energy in the world outside of a couple of petrostates and the most secure product. And they've tripled production in petroleum since about 2006, And yet, okay, gosh, the price gas goes up that's a lot less here than it is almost any place in the world, and it's, oh my gosh, they're profiteering. No, there's market forces out there. But that's off the subject. I would just say my friends are worried about the cost of heating. LIHEAP is a good program. I support it. I've proven that over and over again. But please, 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 let's make sure that we have the gas in the first place. Finally, my friends, dismiss the importance of the Second Amendment because they disagree with it for the most part. That's fair enough. All we're saying is we want the opportunity to actually invest things. My friend made a couple other points, and I just want to quickly address because I want him to be under no, and I don't think he is, under any illusion. I do not hold Senator Murray and Senator Collins in very high regard. I've worked with them both. I worked with Senator Murray in particular for 8 years, either as chair or ranking member of the Labor 8 subcommittee when she held the same respective positions. We came to a deal almost every year. She's a good legislator, and Senator Collins is legendary. But what they're crafting over there right now is well above the agreement that my friend thinks we're violating. And it's pretty easy to declare emergencies. Yeah, I'd love to spend more money on defense. I've said that on this floor. I said that during this debate. So let's just call it an emergency and heap it on. You know, they're laying out a negotiating position. Fair enough. My guess is we're going to end up pretty close to the numbers we agreed upon. And my friend's been very critical of my leader, the Speaker of the House, and that's fair enough. This is politics. But I will tell you this. You guys said he wouldn't get elected, and he did. You said he wouldn't get a bill across the floor to deal with the debt ceiling and then negotiate a deal, but he did. Let's wait and see how this plays out. But my friends need to remember, when it comes to these fiscal issues, you're the ones that never passed a budget for 4 years. You're the ones that left us with a $1.7 trillion deficit. And you've got the White House and the Senate, and have not produced any plan to address it, nor have they been willing to sit down and talk to us about, in a bipartisan way, how could we start dealing with what we all know is the big driver, and that's entitlement programs. So, let's just, we got a lot of problems in front of us. We can point a lot of fingers. Let's do the right thing today, though, and start addressing them. The right thing today is to move ahead and pass this rule, get on to a debate about what we think are important issues. Defending the country is certainly an important issue. Securing our energy future is important, and dealing with constitutional rights. And we'll continue to discuss and work on these other matters. I will agree with my friend. I'm not for shutting down the government. I hope we don't get there. And I always worry about that as we approach these kind of deadlines. Okay. Finally, I asked Mr. Speaker to move the previous question, and with that, I urge the passage of the rule and the underlying legislation.
All time for debate has expired. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Speaker?
The gentleman's recognized.
I ask for a recorded vote. Yeas and nays. I ask for yeas and nays.
The recorded vote has been requested. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
Votes will be taken in the following order: ordering the previous question on House Resolution 712 and adoption of House Resolution 712 if ordered. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the remaining electronic vote will be conducted as a 5-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 712, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 37, House Resolution 712, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 4365, making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1130 to repeal restrictions on the export and import of natural gas, and providing for consideration of the resolution, House Resolution 684, condemning the actions of Governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, for subverting the Second Amendment to the Constitution and depriving the citizens of New Mexico of their right to bear arms.
The question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
All members.
Do I gavel first? On this vote, the yeas are 216 and the nays are 202. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Speaker?
For what purpose does gentleman rise?
Ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 212, the nays are On this vote, the yeas are 212, the nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Cole of Oklahoma moves to reconsider the vote on adoption of House Resolution 712.
The question is on the motion to reconsider. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is adopted.
Mr. Speaker, we request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.